Welcome everybody to my talk. I'm going to talk about how I became an author, and the subject, as we've said before, of my talk is inspiration. Now, back in 1971, I had my third child. I already had a son and a daughter, and I had another son, and his name was Philip. Unfortunately, right from the beginning, Philip had many difficulties, and as he grew, his difficulties grew with him. He had health problems and he had delayed learning of everything. So the doctors suggested at the time that because he wasn't very well and he was in and out of hospital a lot, that might be the reason why his milestones were being delayed. So at the time, we didn't really know very much. And then when he got to 2 years old, he was admitted to Great Ormond Street Hospital, and they did a lot of tests on him. And when they'd finished the tests, they told us that he had severe learning difficulties, which I had already realized, of course, and autism. Well, this was 1973, and really, I didn't really know, much about autism, what it meant, or anything about it. So I literally asked my family doctor for some guidance. And he admitted that he didn't really know about autism either. He was a general practitioner and it wasn't his field. So we realized then that, we were going to have to try and find out ourselves the best way to help my son with his development. He was 2 years old and he'd only just started to sit up. The doctor couldn't really say whether he would ever walk or talk, and even how long he would live because of his frail health. So we literally took each day as it came and, tried to make his life as happy as we could, because we had other children as well. So we weren't going to go around with miserable faces. The one thing that I really did strike me all the way through was every time he had an illness, as soon as he started to get the tiniest bit better, he was straight out of bed, out came the toys, big smile on his face, and really a very, very happy boy. And, looking at him and his attitude made me feel happy, even though I was obviously sad that he had so many difficulties. So we also realized that, his milestones, it was going to be a lot harder for him to achieve them. And as he was 2 years old and the muscles on his legs hadn't been used, because he was just sitting up, they did try at the hospital to give him physiotherapy, but because he had autism, he didn't like being touched. And he got very angry about why, leave me alone sort of thing in his own little way. So I decided that as his mother, I was the one who handled him the most. I was going to do it and he'd have to put up with it. So I massaged all his limbs, and he grumbled a bit in the beginning, but then he accepted it. And then we took him swimming, and obviously, warm water is really helpful for little ones with frail legs. And eventually, at the age of 5 years old, he walked, and I can't tell you how thrilled I was about that, because what it meant was that my son wasn't going to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. He was actually going to be able to run about and play with his toys like other children. So that really, was a wonderful booster to us. And he carried on, fighting everything that was thrown at him. He became a teenager. He was a stroppy teenager, like lots of teenagers are, but he was strong, and that was the thing that mattered. He was getting stronger all the time, thanks to modern medicine. And when he reached 21, I thought to myself, well, the doctors never said that he was going to make 21, and he's here and he's happy. And I was absolutely bursting with pride about my son, because literally he'd been, had so much thrown at him, and yet he still smiled and he still got on with his life. And I thought, I was actually quite heavily involved with MenCap at the time. The MenCap Society organised what they called a gateway club every Thursday evening, and Phil used to go to that, and they used to have music and a disco and, a bit of food and everything. And I also knew that they had a monthly magazine that came out. So I thought, I know what I'll do. So I sat down. I couldn't type or anything because my career had always been in retail, so I'd never actually learned to type. So I sat down and I wrote by hand in an exercise book, it was, everything that had happened that I could remember, obviously, since he was born up until the age of 21. And I, mentioned all the things that we tried that didn't work and all the things that we tried that did work, and just generally brought it all out. And I thought, they can put that in their magazine and that will help other families. So I actually sent it to MenCap because we didn't have emails in those days. It was, you put it in the post. So I sent it to MenCap, and when they received it and read it, they came back to me straight away and said, this really ought to be a book, because, it's a subject that not many people have written about, and it's really, really interesting. And I said, well, honestly, I have no idea how to make it into a book. And luckily for me, they actually had contact details of my publishers, who are United Writers Publications from Cornwall. They're a small family company. But they said that they're often interested in unusual subjects, and this is certainly is an unusual subject. So anyway, I wrote off to my publisher, and then to my horror, he wrote back and said, I'd like to read it, but it must be typed out. And I thought, oh dear, I can't type. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to learn to type. So I went down to a local secondhand shop and bought a typewriter for £50. And I sat down and I thought, well, I work full time. I don't really have a lot of spare time. But in the morning, the day used to start at 7. So I got up at 5 and spent 2 hours then. And then in the evening, by the time we'd had dinner and I'd washed up and everybody was settled, it was usually about 9 o'clock. So I did another 2 hours of the typing until 11 o'clock. And then I went to bed, and so it went on. And it actually took me 6 weeks to type it out. And it was with 2 fingers because, as I say, I was a novice. So anyway, I thought, I wonder if he still wants it, because normally when a publisher says, oh, I'd like to read that, well, nowadays you can just actually just transfer a file. But, it wasn't like that in those days. Everything took much longer. So anyway, I sent it off to him. And after about a week, he said, yes, I would like to make that into a book. But at one point, it should have been double spaced. Now, I didn't know that. I was mortified. But I do make sure now that everything that I type is always double spaced. And I do thank him for being so supportive and still accepting it in spite of my error at the time. So anyway, I decided that my son Phil has never actually spoken. He is non-verbal, but he has developed his own, well, we tried Makaton on him, but it's sort of Philip's language, really. And he makes all his needs known with signs, and we all understand them. But I feel that because he's been through so much and had shown so much courage, and fought against everything and can still keep a smile on his face, that if he could speak, he would say, my life is worth living. So I'm now going to hold up the book, which is called My Life is Worth Living. I hope you can see it. Now, this is not the original book. The book actually came out in hardback, and it's always been my best-selling book. So we sold all the hardback copies. So in 2019, my publisher published it again in paperback, and it's also now available on Kindle, because of course Kindle hadn't been invented in the early 90s when I wrote the original book. And I was very lucky that last year, 2020, it was nominated for a Reader's Choice Award. And I was even luckier still that it actually got first prize in the medical section. So that was a really nice thing to happen. I also have to mention that after the book came out, I had a market amongst secondary schools. A lot of headmasters wanted to have it for their school library, because in the early 90s, we were all, you know, sort of finding out about autism, and they wanted to educate their children about children with autism. And so a lot of them bought it. And they also invited me to come along and address the school at the assembly. And then this progressed on to club talks. So what I did was I wrote to the WI and said that I would like to be on their list. So they said, oh, if you come along and do an audition, and then we'll see if you're okay. So I went along and passed the audition. And up until last year, I was building up the club talks nicely. Unfortunately, because of COVID, they all got cancelled last year. So I'm hoping to start building them up again this year. But the club talk is mainly about the autism, and also, you know, with sort of hints of what we tried and what we found didn't work and all these sort of things, and a few humorous bits, because believe you me, when you're bringing up any children, whether they've got autism or whatever, you have to have a sense of humour sometimes, because some of the situations that you find yourself in with them where you could feel very embarrassed, and one particular one which I'll mention very, very quickly. I don't know if anybody listening remembers this, but years ago, in the supermarkets, they used to have floor displays of tins, and they were all built up to a pyramid. They don't do it now because of health and safety. But when I went in with Philip, I took him shopping because everybody else in the house was doing something. And so I thought, well, never mind, he can come with me and hold on to the trolley. I'm sure he'll be fine. Well, unfortunately, I didn't know, but the day before he'd been having dancing lessons, and the teacher had taught him how to do a twirl. So while I was looking at the cornflakes, Phil decided to do his twirl and practice it in the supermarket. And of course, I turned around when I heard this enormous bang to see tins of baked beans flying everywhere and people rushing around trying to pick them up. Well, of course, when I went home and told my family, because you can imagine how red-faced I was, instead of sympathy, all I got was them, you know, rolling about with laughter and finding it funny. So I decided that I wouldn't take life so seriously after that, because after all, you know, it wasn't anything that was meant to happen. It was just an accident. So there's a lesson there for all of us. So anyway, then I went for a while and I didn't do any writing, because I literally had been inspired by Phil to write that book. But I found I had more time on my hands because I wasn't working full time anymore. I was only working part time, and also my family had left home. So there was just the two of us. And I suddenly thought to myself, I wonder if I can write a novel. And then I thought, that's going to be more difficult than a true story, because obviously a true story, you're just recounting the events that happened. But with a novel, you've got to have your characters, your plot, your beginning, your end. But it was a challenge, and I thought, I think I'd like to try that. So anyway, the next story I wrote was Not Just an Affair, and I'm just going to hold the book up there now for you to see. Not Just an Affair. It was, I didn't want a typical boy meets girl, which lots of books have done. So what I did was, they were a couple, and they were both unhappily married, and they meet and they fall in love and they have an affair. And obviously there's a huge fallout afterwards, because they both have two children and they are mortified and heartbroken that they've upset their families so much. But in actual fact, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of lies and hypocrisy going on by other people. And the people that are condemning the lovers are actually leading lives which are much worse than what the lovers are. So the story is about whether they can survive all the negative attitudes that are displayed, and also whether they can find out what all these other people are up to. And the only way, as I say, to know about that is obviously to read the story. So that's that one. That's Not Just an Affair. And then I went for a couple more years, and I really sort of like, how can I say, dark stories. I watch a lot of the dramas on television with a twist at the end, and like to try and guess it. And more often than not, I don't get it right. So I know that the person who's written it has done a really good job. So I decided to invent Mercedes Morton Brown, who is definitely the evil woman. And again, I'm going to hold up the book here. There we are. You can see her face there. You can see her eyes. You can see how evil she is. Now, with Sadie, we don't know whether she is evil because of something that's happened to her, or whether she was just born that way. But you know, on the surface, everything appears normal. She has parents that love her, a beautiful home, anything she could possibly want. But she goes through life treading on anyone and everyone to get exactly what she wants for her own gratification. And she will even stoop to murder if somebody's in her way. So that's really how really very, very bad she is. And at the end of the book, it was only meant to be a standalone book, but at the end of the book, I'd actually left Sadie where I thought she should be. But the great thing about having readers is feedback, because without our readers' feedback, we wouldn't know where to go next time, would we, and what to do. And when all the reviews started coming in on Amazon, the same theme was all the way through. What did she do after that? What happened after that? So I thought to myself, I'm going to have to write a sequel. I'm just going to take a sip now of water, if you'll excuse me. And so I decided the sequel is called Evil Woman Takes Revenge. And there we have Sadie 10 years later. And I decided to set it in Herne Bay, where I live, because I know all the local places. There was going to be, you know, quite dramatic scenes. And I thought, against the rugged cliffs and the beaches and the area, it would actually set off the story quite well. So I set it in Herne Bay, and it was written in a different way, because I thought we can't have another book with her going through doing evil deeds all the time. It will become a little bit boring, a bit samey to the other one. So I decided in the second book that Sadie was going to, she has a daughter, and she wants to be a better person because she wants her daughter to look up to her. So she's trying really hard to turn her life around and be a better person. But she's got this other side to her, you know, this dark side to her that she desperately wants to control, and she wants to lead a normal life like everybody else. We also discover in that book why she's evil, what happened to her earlier in her life that made her evil. And then, of course, when we get to the end, we have to find out whether she actually gets her comeuppance for all the deeds that she has done in the past, or whether she manages to conquer that dark side of herself and become a normal citizen. So that one is, as I say, called Evil Woman Takes Revenge. And then I went for a couple of years longer, and I decided that I wanted to return to the subject of autism again. And the reason for this is, obviously, when you've been touched by autism and you have a child with autism, you want to try and make their life as happy and comfortable as you can. So I used to read lots of things that I could find, tips and various things. But I read one particular thing that really, actually, I was quite horrified. Now, my son was born in 1971, but up until 1965, mothers were actually blamed for the child's condition. It was believed that a lot of autistic people don't like to be touched. And it was believed that if a baby recoiled from its mother or from anybody that tried to touch it, it was because the mother had not given it love and affection, and they were referred to as refrigeration mothers. And the children were not called autistic. It was said that they had infantile schizophrenia. a completely different condition. But luckily, in 1965, after a lot of investigations, Dr. Bernard Rimland wrote a medical book in which he explained that children with autism, and he did actually call it autism, children with autism, the condition is not psychological, it's physiological. In other words, it's nothing to do with the mother whatsoever. They were simply born that way. Now, having been a mother of a child with special needs, I know how, what's the word I want really, how distressing it is when you realise that you have a child that is going to find it tough in the world, and that you obviously want to give them all your love and support. And back in the 60s, for a mother to not only give birth to a child that was going to need a lot of extra help, but to also be blamed for it, I thought I really had to do something about that. So I wrote my own story, and it was set in the early 60s. There was also at that time a huge stigma about unmarried mothers. I don't know if anybody watches Long Lost Families. I do actually. And it's heartbreaking to see some of these women who are now in their 70s or 80s. They had to give their babies up when they were born. They didn't have a choice. They had them adopted, and they had to just carry on with their lives as if they'd never had a baby. But that grief of losing that child remained with them all their lives. And even if they married and had other children, they never forgot that first child. And it also does something to the child, because even with the most loving home with adopted parents who really wanted a child, when they find out they've been adopted, they quite often wonder why their parent couldn't keep them. They feel a little bit rejected, and that's a really sad thing to happen. And then you see on the program, you see these women in their 70s and 80s meeting up with a child that they had back in the early 60s or 50s even, and that child is now in their 50s or 60s. And of course, the bond is still there. It's amazing how they do connect so easily, and they do stay in each other's lives. But I just think that it's heartbreaking that the mothers, they lost their child all those years where they could have watched their milestones as they grew up, the first day at school, and all the exams they may have passed, and all the things they did, and their first job, and then getting married, and they've missed all that. And to me, I just thought it was so sad. So the book that I wrote, which is set in the 60s, it's called The Power of Love. And the love that I refer to, it's not so much a love story, it's the love that the mother has for her autistic son, because she's in the story, she's 17 and she becomes pregnant by her boyfriend, who is then called up for national service, and he doesn't know that she's pregnant. So what happens is that her mother is horrified. She doesn't want her father to find out. So she's sent to stay with her mother she's sent to stay with her aunt in London. And the idea is that when the baby's born, it will be adopted, and then she will come home again, and her father will never know that she was ever pregnant in the first place. But this girl, Laura, she bonds with her baby as soon as he's born, and she tells her aunt that she's not going to give him up. No matter how poor she is in life, she's going to find a way to keep him and look after him. And this is what she does. But as he develops, he's a very, very intelligent boy. In fact, he's the cleverest boy in the class. But his behavior is different because he has Asperger's syndrome, which is a high-functioning autism. So he still gets bullied and teased by the other children because he's different, at a time when nobody really knows even about the condition. So this mother fights to have her son accepted as the person he is, rather than what society expected him to be at that time. So the power of love is actually between the mother and her son. I'm just going to take another sip of water. Then we come on to my next one. I've always been fascinated by twins, and I'm particularly fascinated by identical twins, because quite often they may look identical, but they've got completely different characters. So I invented twin girls, and one of them was fun-loving, a little bit irresponsible, but lovable. And she didn't particularly work hard at school. She liked the arts and all that sort of thing and having fun. And her twin was, she was dedicated, she worked hard, passed all her exams, went to university and got a really good job. So they are actually orphaned at the age of 8. And the wiser, if you like, the wiser twin, the one that takes life more seriously, mothers her sister a little to make up for the fact that they no longer have their parents, and also because she's a little bit concerned that because her sister's a little bit frivolous, that she might go off the rails at some point. But of course they grow up, and one of the twins has a baby, and the baby is stolen from the hospital. Now, there's 3 people that actually could have stolen that baby. One is her twin, the other one is her best friend, who's recently had a miscarriage and might be looking to replace that baby. And then the ex-partner, his new partner may want to try and, steal the baby from the hospital to take to him so that he can have custody of her. And then, of course, it could be a completely strange person, well, not strange, but a completely different person altogether, who may have had a sad episode in their own life and feel that they desperately need to replace that baby. So the story traces each woman's predicament, and then it's up to the reader to find out whether, which one they think it might be. It is all revealed at the end. And also, will she ever get her baby back, or will the baby be brought up for, forever by another person who isn't really the baby's mother? And that one was published in 2018. And I was very lucky that about a month after it was published, it was again nominated for a Reader's Choice Award. And I came 3rd in the competition of mystery books at that time. And then after that, I thought, now what can I do next? And I rather liked the idea of trying a detective story, because there was a twist at the end of One Moment of Madness. I liked the way that people said to me, oh, I didn't guess it was that. And I thought it was great fun to actually, get minds thinking, see what people thought it would be. And before I go any further, I'm going to actually show you the cover of One Moment of Madness, because I omitted to do that. There she is with her baby before it's stolen. There we go. So anyway, I thought, yes, I'll do a detective story. But the power of Facebook. I went on Facebook and I've got quite a few readers on there that I correspond with. Because in the meantime, my publisher had suggested to me that I might like to do a memoir, my own story. Well, I wasn't really sure about that. I suppose a little bit embarrassed, really, but I have had an unusual life, and obviously I've got the experience of bringing Philip up and the things that we as a family tried to do to help him, which would go into the book as well, and people might like to read about. But I just wasn't sure. So I put a notice up on Facebook to people and asked them, what would they like next? Would they like a detective story or my life story? Fully expecting them to say the detective story. Well, I had 20 responses and 18 of them wanted my memoir and the other 2 wanted a detective story. So I thought, well, obviously I'm going to do what the readers want. So I wrote my memoir, which is called Candidly Carol. I'm just going to hold it up now. That's the cover of it. And it's basically a story of my life from when I was born right up until recent times. So that's that one. And then, of course, unfortunately, it was published just as we went into lockdown, which wasn't very helpful because I couldn't go out and, you know, do any book launches or anything like that to start it off, which I normally do. We all had to abide by the rules. So, but luckily I've started to sell it this year, so that's okay. It doesn't really matter. But anyway, then we went into lockdown. Now, lockdown, it was unprecedented times for all of us. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but I used to wake up in the morning and think, did I dream that? Have we really got coronavirus? Are we really walking around with masks on, or is it just a dream? But no, it was true. And it was the biggest shock, I think, to all of us. Nobody expected that at all. But nevertheless, I thought to myself, well, I'm going to make the most of this time because I've got a lot more free time now than I've ever had. And, you know, I don't want to sit around being miserable and worry about what might happen. So I'm going to try and be productive. So the first book that I actually wrote was the detective novel, the one that I was going to write before my memoir. I thought, I'm going to get on and do this. Now, it's just been released actually on the 14th of May. So that's only a couple of weeks ago. And it's called Nobody's Perfect. That's the cover of it. And on the cover, you see the DCI, Alan Clark, and that's his girlfriend, Zoe. So I'll explain why it's called Nobody's Perfect. The story is about a very well-known celebrity. She's an actress, a singer, a national treasure, really. She's known over the whole, not just in England, she's known the world over. And she has lots of fans. She's a very beautiful woman. She's a very kind woman. In fact, her fans adore her so much that they've literally put her up on a pedestal. And they want to look like her. They want to have her hairstyle. They want to wear the same clothes. And she's just absolutely loved by everybody. And her name is Eleanor. So when she's found clubbed to death in her home, nobody can believe that somebody that's loved so much by everyone, you know, could possibly have been murdered, because why would anybody have a reason to murder her? But when the DCI, Alan Clark, starts to investigate the murder, he obviously has to go and question the family. And as he questions the family, a lot of secrets about her come tumbling out, about Eleanor. And it's, as the story goes along, I'm not suggesting she's a bad person, because she's not. She's just a normal human being. But she's not perfect, because the icon status that she's actually achieved with the public is not quite the person that she is in real life, because she's a normal human being like the rest of us, with failings and good points, good and bad in all of us, isn't there? And this is why it's called Nobody's Perfect. And also the people around her in her life, they're not perfect either. So that is the reason for that title, Nobody's Perfect. So that was my first bit of inspiration in lockdown. And then it occurred to me that in the future, 2020 is going to go down in history for all the wrong reasons, because we're going to say, oh yes, that was the year we had to go into lockdown. That was the year that so many people lost their jobs. That was the year that the children were off school right until September, and they missed a lot of lessons. People lost their jobs, they couldn't put food on the table, all those sort of things. But then there were also the good things, weren't there? There were people like Captain Sir Tom Moore, who actually showed that it doesn't matter what age you are. If you set your mind to doing something, you can do it. And what a remarkable man he was. And how many other people did he inspire to also do something to help the National Health Service? And then there was Marcus Rashford, who got free school meals for all the children that needed it. And lots of other people. I mean, I haven't got time to mention them all. And the wonderful National Health. I mean, aren't we lucky to have our wonderful National Health, those people that work day and night, saving lives. And obviously they saw some terrible scenes sometimes, but you know, they were just so dogged and determined. So we used to go out on the doorstep and clap for them every Thursday night. Well, I felt that all that should go in a book, actually, because it's very important. It's part of our history. So against the backdrop of that, I've invented 4 people. 2 of them are married, and their marriage is in trouble. And the wife wants to leave her husband, but actually she can't because they're in lockdown. And then you have 2 other characters that come to visit from America, and they can't go either because the planes are not taking off. So they're also in lockdown. So the story, as I say, is about all these people all trying to make the best of their lives in a situation that, you know, we may have thought, oh, we're only going to be in lockdown for a month, but it went on, as we know. And everybody's lives changed. So basically, at the end of the book, the reader will see, you know, how they managed, or if they managed, to resolve all the problems that they had. And this one is called Please Forgive Me. I can't show you a cover because we don't have one at the moment. My publisher he's actually editing it as we speak. And that one will be released on the 10th of September. And the reason why it's called Please Forgive Me is because a lot of people are doing things that they shouldn't be, and they are apologizing for them. So that's Please Forgive Me. And then the last book that I'm going to tell you about this evening, this particular book was very much inspired, because I don't know whether you all remember, but last year, the gorgeous weather started in April. And the one thing that Boris said we could do was go for a walk. And we're very lucky. We live at Herne Bay, and we literally come out of our house, and the beach is 5 minutes away, and we have a dog. So every morning we walk to Reculver and back along the beach. And the sun absolutely shone. I mean, it was the temperature was in the 70s. And because the children, there wasn't anything to do. They weren't at school. Nothing was open. They couldn't go to any clubs. They couldn't even play cricket or do anything like that. So the beaches, I have to say, they were socially distancing, but the beaches around our way were full of people with their children. They were in the water in April. And it really, although we were going through a difficult time, it actually gave you a feel-good feeling that the weather was nice and they were out there enjoying it, because it costs nothing to go to the beach and go in the water, but it's still a lovely thing to be able to do. So we actually walked to Reculver and back, as I said, and along the way, we've got a lot of rugged cliffs. And when the tide comes in, it's not actually a cave, but the end of there's like little recesses. I mean, I would actually refer to them as cubby holes. And I thought that's just big enough for somebody to discover a body in. And then I thought, well, why don't I bring DCI Alan Clark down to Herne Bay, Reculver, to solve this murder? So that book is going to be called Perfectly Evil, because it's the sequel to Nobody's Perfect. But it's also the sequel to the Evil Woman books that I told you about, because the Morton Brown family seemed to be involved in this particular murder. So it's up to him to find out whether, whether one of them committed the deed, or it's a visitation back to the same family again, and it creates another story. But I was very, very much inspired, as I say, by our long walks every day, and seeing the tide coming up and all these little recesses. I thought that would make a perfect place to find a body. So before I actually go, if any of you would like to ask me any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I just wanted to reiterate what everybody says. We do all have a book inside us because we all lead very different lives. And as far as I'm concerned, writing is a form of escapism. And if I would not be complete without it. So thank you, everybody, for listening to my talk.